Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to our second last breakthrough speaker event of the term. I want to welcome our simulcast viewers from particularly Western Canada, and also thank Howard Weider and the Canada Excellence Research Chair for underwriting this seminar series. And today it's a great pleasure to welcome Aaron Wolf from Oregon State University. Aaron's a professor in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Science, and he heads up the program in water conflict management and transformation. Aaron's background combines hydrogeology, a master's degree in hydrogeology, and a PhD in policy analysis from the University of Wisconsin. And I think this has given him quite an interesting background to tackle these transboundary water issues. Aaron's a busy guy. He's acted as a consultant to the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and a lot of work for the World Bank over the years. And he's been involved with developing strategies for resolving water aspects of the Arab-Israeli conflict, in particular co-authoring really the defining State Department reference text on the topic. His 98 paper on conflict and cooperation along international waterways has been cited over 500 times. This gives you kind of an idea of Aaron's work and how it's been uptaken worldwide. The last year he's given keynotes at University of Arizona, University of Botswana, the Woodrow Wilson Center, Georgetown University, Federal Ministry of Germany, the Water Diplomacy Consortium in the Netherlands. That's just the last 12 months. It's great having someone who travels 10 times more than I travel. He's on the road all the time. In these last 12 months, he's also delivered short courses in Laos, Botswana, Sudan, Thailand, China, and the Netherlands. So Aaron is very active in this regard, and it's a thrill to have him here. He's very much involved in service to journals and organizations, working on the editorial board of World Water Policy, Water International, and the International Journal of Water, and other journals. He's had many awards, including a Fellow of the International Water Academy, and it's terrific to have Aaron here. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks. Thank you, Jeff. That was really embarrassing, but I appreciate it. And I too want to echo Jeff's thanks to Howard, to my host here at the university. And I have to say, for an American, coming to Canada is always a big treat. You hit the border, suddenly everybody gets friendly, even at the passport control coming into the airport. And I told the class this morning, it's always interesting to me how Americans must be viewed. He asked me one question about Ebola and 10 questions about guns. And I guess, I mean, we're just all packing, but I wasn't. And so I got through the border, but he did ask me, it was, again, very friendly, very inviting. Welcome to Canada. What are you doing here? I'm giving a talk at the university in town. Oh, really, what's your field? Water management. Well, you can't have ours. Never heard a Canadian be that direct. And I get it. It's a sensitive issue. And it's sensitive between the U.S. and Canada. It's sensitive within Canada. It's sensitive within the U.S. It's sensitive around the world. And that's really what I wanted to talk about is how we deal with it as a sensitive issue. So for starters, and you got to yell out here. I know you guys are thinking didn't know it was going to be interactive, right? It's like, just play the video. What do we use water for? Oh, good. You guys are doing a good job, educators. Awesome. What do we use water for? Call it out. Drinking. Absolutely critical. Very small amount of the world's water goes to drinking. What else? Huge amount, right? Goes to agriculture. 2/3 of the world's water to agriculture. What else? Mining. Say again? Mining, irrigation, recreation, transportation, hydropower. Everything. And that's basically it, right? So I had a grad student come up with some pictures for us so we'd be able to visualize. Ecosystem we didn't mention, pretty important topic, but we did mention the others. Transportation, I imagine that's what you had in mind, right? We talked about hydropower, irrigation. We did not talk about spiritual aspects, and I noticed that we don't, and whenever I throw this out, it's always not mentioned, and yet, how many people know that we use water resources for spiritual transformation? Hands way up high. Right? We all know it, and we don't say it in public universities, and that's one of the things that I'm going to end up talking about, is why it's so hard to talk about these issues. And we talked about drinking water. And our trick in water conflict is that all of these are potentially in competition with each other, right? Water management is conflict management, and it doesn't matter what scale, if it's two farmers trying to decide when to open an irrigation ditch, or whether it's British Columbia and the states in the U.S. that share the Columbia with it, whether it's Israelis and Arabs, Indians and Pakistanis, whatever scale, there's not enough for everything. So managing water becomes an exercise in conflict management. Other things about water, of course, it moves, right? Just to get a sense of who's here, how many people are trained in water, some component, some aspect of water? Okay, a bunch of people. How many people feel their training is mostly technical, on the technical side of water? How many people are more on the policy side, management, law? Whew, okay, your work is cut out for you. Okay, so here's the issue. The technical people will know this. People outside of the water world don't. It moves in space and time, right? How much water is there going to be? This is the South Saskatchewan River flowing. How much water is there going to be next year? We don't know, right? And we have to manage it like another resource. Nature gives us this unit, right? I know this is not new for most of us, from the ridge to the stream, in which everything's connected to everything else. And from top down, how do we call that? What's that called? That's a watershed in U.S. English. It's a catchment in British English. Everything within this unit is connected, right? We know that. Surface water, groundwater, quality, quantity, it's all connected. And so this is the unit that nature gives us to manage. And then what do we do with it politically? Chop it up, slice it up. Nice straight lines right there, right? I can talk 9 out of 10 Americans in Oregon, within the Columbia Basin, don't know that the headwaters are in Canada. Don't know. Right? Because on all our maps, there's this nice straight line. The watershed just ends. Right? Nice straight line. Oh, that's so cool. How'd that happen? Must have been a glacier, right? That's so cool. And so when you divide that up, you end up with two competing views of our water resources. The one that water people see here on the slide on the left, this is how water people see the world, through basins. And we understand the connections, and what's emphasized here in these maps are all the things that bring us together. But the rest of the world sees the world with the lines on the map, sees the things that divide us, and those are there for very legitimate reasons, right? Which one is right? Which view is right? Both of them. Right? This is exactly the point. And this is our problem. Here, we're stressing the things that divide us, that separate us. And so our task in water, especially transboundary water, is to manage the basin as if it looked like this, recognizing and taking into account the legitimate things that separate out our countries, our economies, our language groups, and so on, right? So this is the stress. Focusing on the things that unite us while managing for all of the things that divide us. And this has been a problem historically. And when I first started getting involved in water resources, or in these sets of issues, this is now the early 1990s, people were focusing on the conflict aspect. Look at these basins and look at who shares them and how on earth are they going to do it, especially as we're running out. India and Pakistan on the Indus Basin, India and Bangladesh and the Ganges, Brahmaputra. India-Pakistan relations, how are we doing? Pretty good? Up, down? Howard fixed it. Good man. Thank you. Here's another good basin, right? Tigris, Euphrates, Turkey, Syria, Iraq. I think only one of these has a government right now. So how are relations here? Oh, Iran's a big riparian. How are relations here between the riparians of the Tigris, Euphrates? Not so good, right? And here armies actually were mobilized in the 70s on the Iraq-Syria border. Armies were mobilized over a dam. Here's Central Asia. We talked about this in one of our classes today. Here we've got a water conflict moving in one direction, natural gas conflict moving in another. The Ural Sea doesn't look anything like this today. This is an old map. It's a small proportion of what it looks like on this map. And of course, the ones that I'd been heavily involved with, these two, the Nile Basin, there at the time were 10, now there's 11 riparians of the Nile Basin, and only a treaty between two. Egypt and Sudan have a treaty between themselves that allocates all of the water between the two, conveniently forgetting about the other 9 riparians. And then this one, this is easy. The Jordan Basin, right? Let's see, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, not Turkey, West Bank, Palestine, Jordan, Israel. How are relations there? Right? So this is tough. So at the time, people were using these 6 case studies and they were saying, look, these people don't like each other anyway. They share water resources. Clearly, the wars of the next century are going to be about water. And Kofi Annan said this. A lot of people have said something similar. Fierce competition for fresh water may well become a source of conflict and wars in the future. Right? How many people agree? Hands way up high. Yeah, it's intuitive, right? We're running out. We use it for everything. We hate each other, all these kinds of things. Clearly we're going to go to war. Now, the problem, as Jeff said in his generous introduction, I was trained as a scientist initially. And so I'm looking at these 6 case studies, and I asked the question a scientist would ask, what do we really know? What are the assumptions? Are these 6 representative? What do they tell us about the whole world? They can't be the only cases there are in the world. So I did what geographers do, is start to make maps. Started to make maps of what we did know. And what we knew is that there are many more than 6 international basins in the world. In fact, there's 276 international basins. It's half the land surface of the earth. 40% of the world's population live within shared basins. 80% of freshwater flow originates in basins that are shared by 2 or more countries. Now that's interesting. We're hearing about 6 and there's 276. What's going on in the rest of the world? The other thing that we hadn't heard, not about groundwater, certainly now they're talking about 400 shared aquifers around the world. We're not hearing anything about those. The other thing we're not hearing about, everybody was focusing on the conflicts in these basins, suggesting that there had been conflict and that it was imminent, but there's a whole spectrum of things that countries can do with each other. They could conflict, or they might do nothing, or they might cooperate. And there's different levels of what that means to conflict or cooperate. And so the question I had is, we've heard about these 6. How did they end up? What's going on in the rest of the world? Let's do it a little bit more systematically than hearing about these 6. So we started to count stuff. We started to collect stuff. That's what we do in the sciences is pull things together. And so we started to collect all the reference to, there's now 3,600 water-related treaties since 805 AD. We have the full text of the most recent 500 online negotiating notes, bibliography, news cases, all of these different aspects. And one of the important things we did was take news files the last 60 years. Any time 2 countries did anything over water, we captured it. And we coded it, and we asked, what did they do? So you'll have the date, the basin, who the parties were, where they are on that spectrum I showed you of conflict to cooperation, what the issue was, and how intense was the conflict or cooperation. And just by doing that, we start to get a much more nuanced picture of the story. Here's what we had. Over 60 years, 1,800 events between states, on this spectrum from cooperation to conflict. 2/3 of the time we do anything, it's cooperate. 2/3 of the time we do anything, it's cooperate. And it's all of the cases that we saw, those 6 case studies. The case studies weren't telling the whole story. They said, yes, the armies were mobilized in 1979, and then they negotiated, and they have an agreement that they've held ever since. And India and Pakistan threatened each other with war in 1950, 1958, and they signed a treaty that they've held absolutely to ever since, without any violence over water resources. So we're getting part of the story. The cooperation is even between the people who people were holding up as the exemplars of the impending conflict. On the conflict side, notice this. 80% of conflict is verbal conflict. This is basically two things happening. It's politicians saying there's going to be conflict, and it's journalists writing about conflict. That's the action in the water conflict world. Now, I know it never happens in Canada, but sometimes in the US, politicians lie. In other parts of the world, politicians lie. They say things that aren't actually true or predictive. And so if you think about why a politician would say, we're going to go to war, what might they actually be saying? First of all, to whom are they speaking? Are they speaking to the neighbors? Who are they generally speaking to? To their own constituents. And what do they actually mean when they say we're going to go to war? What do they actually mean? Vote for me in November. Absolutely. Vote for me in November. Right? So that's interesting. So we have a lot of action around journalists, and journalists don't even get me started, right? I will spend hours and hours and hours. Journalists call me up all the time. Tell me about the water wars. Well, there's all this cooperation. It's really interesting. India and Pakistan cooperate. Israelis and Arabs cooperate. It's really fascinating. Sure enough, the next day, what's the headline read? Water wars on the horizon. Absolutely. That's the story, right? That's the action. Here it is. So in the last 60 years, there have been 38 cases of actual conflict across boundaries, specifically around water. 27 of these were between Israelis and Arabs, which is interesting because the last shot fired on the Jordan over water was in 1970. So here's a basin, arguably one of the tensest basins in the world, hydrologically one of the tensest basins in the world. They ran out of water. Demand hit supply in the Jordan Basin in 1968. The last shot was fired in 1970. And all that time, think of all of the tumult in the region. 2 wars, 2 intifadas, maybe a third intifada starting now. All of the immigration, the Soviet immigrants into Israel, the Gulf immigrants into Jordan and Palestine, populations growing, economies growing. They're still out of water, and all the time, they've resolved their water issues in the absence of violence. Now that's really, really interesting. That starts, to me, I start to ask, how is this possible? How is it that all the people we expect to be fighting each other over water don't? How is it that there's so little violence? And so that becomes the next set of questions, focusing on a couple of things. One, the long time that it takes to develop institutions that then help resolve the issues. I'm actually going to, let me say this quickly. The next challenge is this myth that everything's okay. All we have to do is wait and everybody will get along. And that's not true, right? We still are concerned about water resources, maybe not about water wars, but about the time it takes. So if we look at how long it takes to go from unilateral development to a process of conflict resolution, to resolve these issues takes 10 or 20 or 30 years. And all the time the water's being mismanaged, all the time the water's not used effectively, all the time it's being used as a political weapon, if not an actual weapon. The other point about it is that we focused on the international scale. As you drop in scale, there is violence over water. In India, on the Kovri Basin, 2 states in India have been basically in a state of civil war for decades over the Kovri. As you drop, there's plenty of ethnic violence, tribal violence over water. And certainly as you drop further in scale, farmers have been fighting each other since time immemorial over their shared basin. And the last thing that I would say is that if we're interested in the relationship between security and water, it's not just about war and peace. First thing is that now, with or without wars, 1.5 billion people lack access to sanitation, and 2.5 to 5 million people die every year simply because they don't have access to water. That in and of itself is a crisis. And so you don't need a war to say we got to do something about the water situation in the world. People are dying now, ecosystems are being degraded now, and there's a lot to be done simply getting... but the other interesting thing in the same vein is when we run out of water, there is another security dimension to it that's not about war and peace necessarily, but what happens when these are all heavily irrigated areas, and the countries are countries where the irrigated areas are being lost to either overpumping or to water degradation. And so here in North China Plain, for example, when you start to run out of water, what do people do? What do people in the countryside, what's their choice when you run out of water? You have three choices. Move, drill deeper, so you can adapt, you can move. What's your third option? Suffer and die. Those are your three options, right? And those are the three options facing rural communities all over the world when faced with environmental degradation, right? Here, what do? From the North China Plain, what are they doing? Moving. Where do they move? They move into cities, where the cities that don't have the infrastructure. Who's moving? Single angry men, right? That's basically who's moving into the cities, not finding the infrastructure, not finding the support. And so if we look, for example, at Syria, everything that's happened now came on the tail end of a 4-year drought centered precisely in Homs and Hama, precisely where the discord started and has now spread out into what we're seeing today. So the simple fact is that people running out of water, that's a stability, it's a security issue, not in terms of war and peace, but simply in terms of infrastructure and capacity to deal with human security. What that means is, while we're thinking about war and peace, we also should be thinking about poverty alleviation, because that then becomes a legitimate security strategy. None of this was what I wanted to talk about. Kofi Annan, after he was faced with a lot of this, came full circle. He said the water problems, yes, we're concerned about water, need not only be a cause of tension, they can also be a catalyst for cooperation. If we work together, a sustainable future can be ours. And this is where I spend about half of my time, looking at kind of the global scene or the watershed scale. What are the dimensions? What are the settings where people conflict and not? And that's useful, but not what I wanted to talk about tonight. What I wanted to talk about is what happens in the room, because the other side of what I do is facilitate. When people are resolving these issues, somebody's got to be in the room helping to guide that process. And sometimes it's me with a team, sometimes it's something that I get access to and learn about. And that's really where I wanted to focus. Because as you heard, my initial training was technical. Then I went back for policy analysis and conflict resolution. But all of it is in a Western rational model. And so the problem is when you're in the room itself, how many people have ever been in a conflict setting? How many people have ever been in a relationship? Okay, you all been in conflict settings. And so here's the question. Did it feel rational to you when you were going through it? I just love the laugh. That says it all right there, right? Yeah, I was being rational, right? No, and so the interesting thing about going through these processes, how many people have been like in a big stakeholder group or a couple of group process? So one of the things that I started to notice as I'm doing this, I'm trying to bring the rational models to bear. We're taught people agree when it's in their interest to agree, right? We talked about this in class this morning. People agree when it's in. How do you know that it's in their interest to agree? Well, because they agreed. Anybody ever take a philosophy class or a logic class? That's a tautology, right? That's circular logic. Absolute circular logic. If you don't know something is going to happen until it happened, you don't have. And so what you notice in the process, at least I started to notice, is that the way things happen, it wasn't about the rational mind going, oh, I suddenly have my interests met, I am now going to agree. It was transformative. We'd sit there and struggle, and then something would happen, and boom, we're moving. And nothing, and nothing, nothing, nothing. And then boom, we're moving to another level. It would happen in kind of leaps. It would happen in insight or transformative moments. And I didn't know how to deal with that. Nothing in my training talked about transformative moments. And so what we would see is, for example, in process, this is a nice model. This is Jay Rothman's model of stages in negotiation. People walk into the room, they're really, really angry, the adversarial stage. At some point, somebody will do something nice, listen to somebody else, or compliment somebody else, or acknowledge somebody else, and that's contagious. And at that point, you may move into what's called the reflexive. People are listening to each other, and then they may integrate and then learn to work together. And these happen when they happen. It's sudden, right? It doesn't always flow through all of these. In water resources, we see this as starting from our right. We deserve the water because we're upstream. We deserve the water because we've been using it the longest. And at some point, it's nice that you deserve it. What do you actually need, right? What do you need for your irrigation? What do you need for transportation? That's a very different set of conversations. And then what we did, US and Canada on the Columbia Basin, was move past that to think about our interests, to think about the benefits that we each gain by managing the water collectively. So British Columbia stores peak flows in British Columbia so that the city of Portland, Oregon doesn't get flooded. That's a benefit. That's a tangible benefit that we gain through managing together. We, British Columbia and the states in the US, can both get more hydropower by optimizing our dams with each other. These are tangible benefits that we gain. That's how it works in water negotiations. And if you think in pictures instead of in words, as I do, you start with the basin with the boundaries the way they are. You take the boundaries off the map to understand what our shared interests are. And a lot of times when I've done this, it's kind of jarring. People see this for the first time. They see the basin without the boundaries. And that's one of those transformative moments. Like, whoa, where am I? I don't get it. Then you think about the benefits. These are cornucopia. I couldn't think of another symbol for benefits. And then the last stage, of course, this fourth stage, of course, you have to put the boundaries back on the map, as we did with the US and Canada on the Columbia. We write a check every year to Canada, to British Columbia, for the benefits that we receive downstream, right? So this is how it kind of works in water. And again, as I said, my experience in the room is it doesn't happen as a flow. It happens in fits and starts, and it happens in sudden moments. And if you think about that transformative moment in your life, you can't learn about it in conflict resolution classes, right? I had never. Maybe they're teaching it now. I'd never been exposed to it. Where do you find these moments out in your life? When has your understanding suddenly been changed? I can't communicate with the people online, can I? Just type it in. Anybody? Okay, how many parents in the room? Change your life? A little bit, right? 1 minute, there you are, the center of the universe. That next minute, it's like, yeah, I don't care about your degrees. Feed me. Right? Suddenly, I mean, it's a sudden, profound shift in your understanding of the universe. And it happens in other ways. God forbid somebody gets sick, right? Oh, I get it now. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to spend more time with my family. I'm going to hike in the woods, all these kinds of things. And so I'm trying to think of these analogs where I can understand these moments. And I was working with a guy at the World Bank, a guy named Vahid Alavian, who I thought total left-brained guy. He's an economist, hydrologist. And so I thought he went through the world measuring everything and had just always dealt with him on that level. And we worked together. And I was asking him, why is this so jarring when you see the basin for the first time without the map? Why does that get people? That feels like one of those moments in a negotiation setting where suddenly people are getting it. And he said, turns out that he's a deeply practicing Baha'i. And he said to me, well, it looks like an analog for spiritual transformation. Just said it so matter-of-fact like that. He said, think about it. Here we are in our daily lives with all of our boundaries, our needs, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm whatever I am. And what faith traditions try and allow you to do is take your boundaries off your map and think about more in terms of the relationship to each other or to the divine, if that's the language you're working in. He said to me, why don't you go study transformation in spiritual communities and see what you can bring back to the negotiation setting? So I don't know if you caught that nice introduction to Jeff's or the first slide. I'm in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences in Oregon State University, public campus. I'm all about not going off and understanding spiritual transformation. And all of my little red flags go up, and I'm like, no. But then the scientist in me goes, dang, what a great idea. I mean, this is the beauty of science, is you got to go where it takes you, right? If you don't, you're not being true to science. So the more I'm thinking about this, the more I'm thinking, what a great idea. I mean, here I'm struggling with the idea of transformation, and here's this vast world where people have thousands of years of experience working with the transformative moments. Certainly there should be something to learn, only as a scientist, mind you, that I can go and study and maybe take back so that we can do our negotiations more effectively. So two things happened that allowed for that pursuit. One is I got tenure, so I couldn't get fired for asking the question. Love tenure. And two, I had a sabbatical, so I could take a year to do that, to really travel the world and work with people who were negotiating or facilitating from a faith or spiritual position, and understand from them two sets of questions. One is, what are the models? What are the models, the spiritual constructs for anger, for conflict, and what are the constructs and models for conflict resolution or for conflict transformation? That's one kind of the big picture models that we might use. And the other is the more practical, the process techniques. What are the tools that we can use? How do we sit? How do we listen? What do we do with food, with music, all these other kinds of things that we can do to help create the settings that are more conducive to these moments than not. So the first thing we did, I worked with, some of you may know the name Peter Glick, the Pacific Institute, great scientist, gotten a little bit of trouble over some climate, getting access to some climate data. Doesn't matter. He's a terrific, terrific guy. Pacific Institute, Oregon State University, and the Vatican Science Council. How many people knew the Vatican had a science council? A couple of people. I thought it was a contradiction in terms. He said, hey, let's go to the Vatican. It's like, what? They do. And the three of us collaborated on a meeting where we brought together people who'd negotiated water treaties at a very high level and leaders from different spiritual communities who dealt with transformation at a very high level. And we brought them together for a week in Vatican City. How many people have been to the Vatican? Couple of people. Okay. How many people have been behind the Vatican? Really? Really? I never had. I thought so. The rest of you, like the rest of all of us, are out like with the hoi polloi, out in the multitudes, out in St. Mark's Square, right? St. Peter's Square. That's right. St. Peter, of course, right? St. Peter's Square. So you're out with the multitudes, and who's keeping you back from going into the back? Who are they? Yeah, the Swiss guards, right? And where they have the halberd, right? Halberd's like between a sword and I don't know, it's a nasty looking thing, and they stand there in their Renaissance, their medieval uniforms, keeping you back. But because we were being hosted by the Vatican Science Council, we had a key to the hostel in the back where the meeting was. So all we had to do was walk by and flash our hostel key, and the Swiss guard would bring his halberd, whatever it's called, salute us, and we'd walk past. Kind of a rush. I just like doing that like all day long. I just walk back and forth. But the point is, we have this great meeting, and the setting is spectacular, and it's pretty much of a flop as a meeting because we just don't speak each other's language. I mean, you think about it. One guy We got a Nepalese toxicologist talking about parts per billion of whatever it is. And next to him, there's this Sufi mystic who doesn't say anything, but he just glows with positive energy. And you want to sit next to the guy. And we didn't, I mean, it's hard to have a conversation and get to where we got. But what I did get out of it was the kind of sets of questions that I wanted to ask and some hint as to the frameworks that I wanted to pursue. And the students that I met with earlier know this. Here's our 4 kind of levels of conflict. Here's in water negotiations. Here's our map. And there was this other construct that they all seem to work from. Anybody recognize this? The physical, emotional, the intuitive, and the spiritual. Those, where do you know it from?
I know from my culture. I born in that culture that is water is spiritual conflict. So we use water everyday spiritual.
In all of these aspects. Anybody recognize it from anywhere else? So in the postdocs, they named something else. Anybody recognize this from psychology? Sorry? Not Myers-Briggs. No. Also Myers-Briggs. Before Myers-Briggs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you recognize it, maybe you recognize it from one of those cases. A lot of people think about Maslow right away. Yes, clearly this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is, and so he basically says these are all the things that drive us. These are our basic needs. Somebody updated this now for the 21st century. I like that. But it turns out to be much more universal than Maslow and long predate Maslow. Most spiritual traditions have this idea, these 4 levels. This is a bad chart, lost something in the Mac translation. But basically, those 4 levels, Buddhists know them as the four foundations. And the Buddha, according to tradition, meditated on these 4 in this order the night of his transformation. Sufis will know it as 4 names of God, also in order, 4 understandings of the divine. In indigenous cultures in the Americas, we talk about them with their icons, the serpent on the ground, the jaguar around here, the hummingbird in the intuitive, and then the eagle is the spiritual level. The 4 directions, the 4 first foods. Just about everywhere you go, you find some allusion to these 4. The chakras moving from more basic up. This turns out to be a fairly universal construct that you can talk about in just about any tradition. The way I know it is Moses went up these 4 levels of holiness as he went up Mount Sinai, and then the temple in Jerusalem, when it was constructed, was a guided meditation through these 4 levels, through the courtyards, from the outer to the inner. Anybody know what was in the center, in the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem? Nothing. Absolute nothing. Just the divine spirit. And only one person gets to go in. The high priest goes in on one day on Yom Kippur, and he has a rope attached to him because his one job is to say the divine name and bring good fortune to the people. And if he does it wrong, he dies on the spot. So this idea then was written in, when the temple was destroyed, was written into the Jewish prayer service as a precise guided meditation through these 4 levels. So devout Jews will do this 3 times a day. Anybody know what Maslow's hierarchy, Maslow's tradition was, where he came from? His parents were Russian immigrants of Jewish faith. Maslow stole his hierarchy from God. Just stole it flat out, never even referenced it. But it's not just here. If you go, how many people have been to Angkor Wat? Angkor Wat, right? Same thing. 3 levels out and up. And what's at the very top? Nothing. Just a red sash representing Buddha. Once upon a time, it was a statue of Vishnu. When it was Hindu, now it's Buddhist. So this idea is universal. So what does it mean for us? Well, it means that when we think about these four levels, there's all kinds of ways to use this as a model, certainly in terms of needs. So Israelis and Arabs were negotiating over needs, couldn't they agreed that they would negotiate over water, over their needs, and couldn't decide on prioritizing. How do you prioritize all of the needs that people have? This is a problem we have universally, right? Well, the farmers think more should go to farming, the city people more to the cities, the environmentalists more should be left in the stream, and so on. And we had this kind of conversation until they decided that the absolute first priority should be two. Which two? Drinking and, say it. Oh, no. I thought you said something else. Don't say it. Don't say it. Physical, the drinking water, and spiritual. And this was one of those profound transformative moments. They took both ends of the pyramid, and they said, we recognize, one, that no matter whether you're Israeli or Arab, you need the same amount to survive. And that was huge symbolically and also practically, because it meant that the Israelis had to commit to providing more water to the Palestinians because they have more water. And two, that your spiritual tradition requires whatever it requires and has the same legitimacy as all the other spiritual traditions in the room. So we're talking about now Christians, Muslims, and Jews all agreeing, recognizing each other's tradition as having equal legitimacy to their own. So symbolically, this was really, really powerful. And then it was easy to move through the rest of the priorities. And it isn't what you would think. It wasn't all agricultural water versus all industrial water. It was subsistence was the next hierarchy. Subsistence can mean agriculture, or it can mean industry. If you require water for your livelihood, that's subsistence. Then desperate ecosystems in danger of collapse. Then industrial, and industrial could be farming if there's industrial farming, or it could mean Intel, or whoever else, whatever other industry. So once you got these two, this is a breakthrough. The other thing that's useful is thinking about how do we design meetings. Most of the meetings I've been at around transboundary waters have been, any guesses where? Windowless rooms in the basement of hotels. Now, if you were to think about our basic needs, is that the best place that you would have a meeting over negotiations? Absolutely not, right? You start to think about things differently. Everybody in the room has physical needs. What does that look like? We need light, we need air, we need food, we have emotional needs. We need to be heard, we need to be understood, we need time, right? This now becomes a blueprint for designing a meeting in a way, and we have spiritual needs. Absolutely ignored in most Western tradition. And the whole tenor of a meeting. How many people have been in a meeting where First Nations were involved? And did you start with a prayer? You did, right? You can, or you must in some cultures. We in the West have lost that, but I've been in rooms where a whole series of faiths have been represented, starting with a prayer, again, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, all in a row, and it changes the whole tenor of the discussions, right? So this is useful, and there's another whole set of implications for how we do negotiations that this also helps to guide. I don't want to talk a lot about that because I want to talk about another structure. We've gone... Any geographers in the room? Yes. So geographers will make a map of anything. This is a map of God's consciousness, according to the Kabbalists. And I wanted to put it up here because there's another model that also tends to be universal, and that's if the way this works, these are spheres of kind of divine attributes. And there are three in here that I want to focus on in this kind of inverted triangle here. The one is loving kindness, mercy, openness. The other is deen, justice, the closed aspect of energy, basically. And the last is compassion. The way this works, if you think about this as a model for negotiations, loving kindness is great, but you can end up giving away the farm, right? All of us have this idea that, oh, we just have to love each other and everything will be fine. That's not the way it works. Loving kindness is profound, transformative, transcendent, and needs to be balanced with the boundaries, needs to be balanced with justice, needs to be balanced with the laws, needs to be balanced in a way and sit together in what we call compassion. So compassion is, yes, I understand your position, but I also am rooted in my own safety. This word, rachamim, comes from the same root in Hebrew as rechem, which is womb. And the idea is a mother gives total life force to her unborn child only as long as she's healthy herself, right? So this is a model. If you think about it anatomically, we've got right brain, the open transcendent. We've got left brain, the rational, the linear, sitting together in our heart, right? So this model also tends to be universal. Anybody recognize it from any other traditions? Holy Trinity, absolutely. What do we got? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? Any place else? Somebody else said it. Also tends to be fairly universal. It's in Buddhism, it's in Christianity. The interesting thing, as a model for conflict resolution, it's profoundly useful. And this is why I wanted to show this. I wanted to focus on this division here. If we think of this side of our brain as science and this side as spirit, what we did in the Enlightenment, what we call the Enlightenment, was consciously make a division. And we said collectively that our public discourse, our public dialogue, anything we do in public is fine as long as it's got a scientific base. As long as it's got a number attached to it, you can measure it, you can quantify it, you can talk about it. If you can't, you can have this world, but on your own time. Friday, Saturday, Sunday communities, in the evening with your family, whatever it is. And we're not going to bring these two spheres together. So here's what's interesting in our world in conflict resolution. In the U.S., we're really good at this. Somebody did something wrong, we lock them up. That's justice for us. We lock them up. We don't think about reentry. We don't think about the community. We don't think about face. And in the rest of the world, there are other models for conflict and conflict resolution, like in the Middle East, where you have a ceremony called the sulha, a ceremony of forgiveness, where when somebody does something wrong, they come to the people they offended under a white flag, and they ask for forgiveness. Yes, I took power away from you. I now give the power to you back. Please forgive me so that we can move into reconciliation together, so that our community can be healed. When something's wrong, it's considered a rent in the community, not just something that the individual did. And so this one eye on the individual and the other eye on the community is something that we lost when we decided to separate out the two spheres. This wonderful world, originally Farsi and also in Arabic, Taraddin, resolution of a conflict that involves no humiliation. What a great concept, right? We don't have that, not in the U.S., maybe in Canada. This is another model for conflict resolution, to understand how the two. Now, the interesting part about this, the source of anger in this model is too much self. We did these exercises with the postdocs and the undergrad. When I get angry, I'm trying to defend, I'm trying to protect vulnerability. Too much self. And so if you think about how that can slide into anger and evil, think about the last time you got angry. Somebody cut you off on the road. I'm right. Then I'm righteous. Then I'm self-righteous. And then if that keeps escalating, I get other people on my side, I can do hurt to other people. We are all so self-righteous, we can harm other people. And that's the model, but it also gives us a model of what to do with it. When you're faced with anger, our temptation is to come back with anger. But if we know that anger is protecting vulnerability, what's our other option? Open up and listen. At some point, the anger dissipates, and what's left is the vulnerability, right? That's really powerful stuff. And you see it in negotiations all the time, right? People say, no, no, no. Well, take a walk. Why not? We're not sure. The other guys are going to take advantage of us, right? all the time, over and over. You find that. And so now this allows us models for how do you open up? How do you provide the space for the anger to dissipate, the vulnerability to come out on the table, and have the conversation around shared values rather than competing positions? So the question I had, again, was this universal, and I was working with a monk in a Thai forest, and I asked him about this. I said, my understanding of Buddhism is it's all about metta, it's all about loving kindness. He said, well, have you ever seen this symbol? This is something. He says it's Taoist, but we borrow it, right? This is for us basically the same concept. Self and other, rationality and transcendence, spirituality and science, all of these things need to work in conjunction with each other. And I say all of this, basically the same concept in Hinduism, the third eye, the eye of justice, the eye of mercy, and the eye of intuition. If you need science, it's the Nash equilibrium, right? This guy, he won the Nobel Prize for deciding that economics wasn't about people pursuing their self-interest. He figured out that the equilibrium is between where your self-interest meets the self-interest of the community. Oh my gosh, he gets a Nobel Prize. He also stole this from God. These guys, it's just pulling all this wisdom. But the point is that this stuff is universal, and there's a whole set of tools that comes with it. Those chairs, can I ask you a question? Those chairs that are there, do they come out? Are those actual chairs? Those aren't? So I'll end. I want to do one exercise just to talk about the tools and how they can be useful. And I can walk over there, right? We're good? Okay. This isn't just pie in the sky stuff. What I wanted, and we have so little time, and I know I've already gone over a bit, but what I wanted to say is this. One, as a scientist, this is where my investigation has taken me, and there's a host of powerful, powerful models to understand things like conflict and things like anger. There's phenomenal tools. If you happen to be practically oriented, there's phenomenal tools out there that we in the conflict transformation community need to be drawing on. And if we don't, we're just stupid. I'm sorry to say that, but if we don't, we're just not. And this idea of the balance between rationality and spirituality, I get why the Enlightenment happened in the West. But we have to remember that we've been doing it so long, we've forgotten that there's other ways of seeing the world. And this is why MJ's work is so powerful to me, the ways of seeing that she does here. We've basically been looking at the world through one eye, and we think we can see perspective. And we've forgotten until we go out into the rest of the world, and they bring up things like honor and community and face and spirit, all these things that are powerfully, powerfully important that we have forgotten how to grapple with. And so I would urge, especially when we go out with all of our aid and water resources, and we say, and here's how you have to measure it, and here's how you have to quantify it, here's your metrics for success, and we don't include any of that stuff, now it's us missing the boat and not them. And that does become a little bit of intellectual imperialism if we try and impose that. So my urge is, let's remember that it's out there and learn what we can and try and incorporate it where we can. And I'll show you this one tool that I learned. I need a volunteer for this. I need somebody who can just model. No, you won't work at all. I can tell already. You meditate, right? Yeah, you're way too calm. I need somebody who can get angry. No, you're not going to work either. No, all right. Why don't we do it, Jeff? Yeah, let's. So what can you get angry about? We have to do it here because these are the only chairs in the place. What can you get angry about?
Meetings being scheduled on my Outlook calendar without me knowing.
Without you knowing. Yeah. How about something that triggers you a little more than that?
No, that really gets me.
That
going.
really gets you going. What? Any other topic? Anything else?
I don't know. When I don't get to play defense on the soils team, and it's all Ken's fault. I have to play forward.
You have to play
I hate
forward.
that.
Something else that really triggers you, really gets you going.
Oh, geez. Why did I agree to this? Give me a context. Pardon me?
No, sports too separable. How about you got to do, and not here, but maybe Oregon State University back in the old days, and you had to do all kinds of crazy things simply because some bureaucrat who's never been in a classroom wanted you to do them. Does that bother you?
Yeah.
You had to do.
I had to document learning objectives for teaching and go through ABET accreditation, and it drove me nuts.
And it was always somebody who'd never been in a classroom who's driving all this, right? Okay, I feel your pain. So I'm going to be the person who designed this, who's making you do this. And your job is to be as angry with me as you can for as long as you can, okay? So I don't really care. I'm the professional here. What do you get your PhD in? Something water related. You don't understand anything about education. No, you have to talk to me. You have to tell me how angry you are.
Okay. What? Say it again?
I gave you these things for your own good. You don't understand education. I'm an administrator. I get education. I'm telling you what you need to be doing.
I know education. I've been teaching for 20 years. You don't know what you're
Seriously,
talking about.
have you ever been trained to teach? I took courses
I got a PhD.
in
For God's sakes. They taught me how
PhD
to
in
teach.
what? In some little subject about this big.
taught
Seriously, you
labs.
sat in a library for 5 years looking at nothing, and you think you could go out and teach people?
I've been hands-on with students for 15 years. We've in labs and tutorials. I know teaching. What are we doing now, Aaron?
So you feel you have some expertise in teaching?
A little.
And how to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we should be working together on this and figuring out how we can meet our needs in the administration, also your needs as an educator?
That'd be
That
great.
makes sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, terrific. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so give him a big First of all, I'm glad I never faced you on a hockey rink. But so second of all, what happened, right? I know this is a shared frustration, probably not as deep as some things that you have in your life, but it is a shared frustration. And where were you most uncomfortable?
When you're farthest, well,
Yeah, right?
yeah, but
Right
then
about
things,
here. Right? And then what happened? All I did was two things. I sat next to him and listened. That's it. Now, if you think about it, when we negotiate, when we design our negotiations, it's usually like this. And this is psychologically the worst possible situation for negotiations. I see everything. I see his eyes dilating. I see his pulse. I see the, right? And anger feeds on anger, feeds on anger. That's a lousy way to negotiate. And so if you think about when we negotiate, we line it up like this. But in all of our faith traditions, how do we pray? Take this energy and turn it into this energy, right? So all I did, I sat down and I started to listen. And the skill of listening, it's not a Western skill, but how many people have ever talked to a Buddhist monk? Right? Feel like you're the center of the universe? They listen in a way that exhausts you, right? I mean, they're so present. And this deep, deep, profound, transformative listening is actually a skill that you can learn. And it changes everything in the negotiation setting. And so simply sitting next to somebody and listening to them changes the entire dynamic of a conversation. So if you take nothing else tonight, take this home with you. Next time you get tense with somebody, especially somebody you love, sit next to them and listen to them and see what happens. Now, the other thing that Jeff either felt or didn't feel is as I came towards you, I matched your breathing and slowed both of our breathing down. This is also, it's a Buddhist meditation technique, and you can physically calm somebody next to you simply by doing that. Matching their breathing and then slowing your breathing down, which will slow their breathing down. Breathings match each other. Where are our parents? Whose parents in the room? Right, we do it instinctively. Crying baby on your shoulder, that's exactly what we do without even noticing it. We match the baby's breathing, we slow it down, right? These are the kinds of techniques, simple things, listening, space, energy, breathing. All of these kinds of things are so powerful and transformative in the negotiation setting. It's a rich source for us to be drawn on. Thank you.
Good. Thanks. We're just running out of time, but I do want to take time for a couple of questions. I'm also wondering if we can use these techniques when negotiating a salary increase with Toddy next time. I don't know if she's
Only
still
if
here.
your heart is pure. Only if your heart is pure. Yeah.
Questions for Aaron?
Yeah. Of?
Proxies, so say like people in a relationship maybe will use baseball or hockey to talk about something else.
Yeah.
And can that be useful or can it be damaging, I guess? in
I didn't
negotiations?
hear the first part of your question.
The use of proxies or using something
Proxies.
else. Yeah.
Proxies. Send somebody else in to negotiate?
No, sorry. Using like talking about something but through something else.
Oh. So give me an example.
So like say baseball. Maybe like my dad and my brother will go to a game and
Right.
somehow share their worldview
Right.
just by talking about a game of baseball.
Nice. What do you mean
Yeah.
just? What else is there? I don't know.
Hockey.
Right. Fair enough. So yeah, I mean it's really powerful. Water, I think, is often a proxy. When we're negotiating about water, it's almost never about water. It's everything else, and everything else feeds into our discussions about water. I'm in favor. I haven't seen it in this setting. Have you seen it?
No.
Yeah. Baseball's a religion. I think that fits up there. Thanks. Yeah. By the way, I got to use this example. There is an example. How are wars started? Most of you aren't old enough to remember. 1992 World Series. Anybody remember who was in it? 1992. It was the first time it had been a non-U.S. team. Toronto, right? So Toronto's playing in the U.S. This deep listening comes into play. When they walked out with the Canadian U.S. flags, anybody remember there was a problem? Yeah, they walked out, the U.S. Marines walked out with the Canadian flag upside down. And of course, immediately, because this is what we do, right? When we don't know something, we fill it in with our own story. And the story was, the U.S. is trying to influence. There were talks about Quebec at the time, and U.S. is trying to influence Canadian politics, and they're trying to send this message, they're trying to send this message, and that's basically what you heard was all the different meanings that this had. And somebody actually went and found the poor Marine who had done it and said, what message were we sending? He said, I wasn't trying to send anything. I honestly didn't know, but I've seen maple trees before, and so I carried it out the way the leaf hangs on the tree. Simplest thing in the world, right? Yeah, sorry, you had a question back here.
I was just kind of curious, like some of the areas that you were talking about that had some conflicts with like Israel and whatnot. How would you deal with conflict in the context of spirituality itself being the conflict?
Yeah.
Right? And you're kind of making the case, which I think you did well, of incorporating spirituality and conflict resolution. But what if one of the focal issues is that spirituality? Yeah. How do you kind of navigate that?
It's a great point. So, and I want to do one thing. It's really important to distinguish. When I, in my world, in my view, I distinguish strongly between spirituality and religion. And so the focus of conflict is often religion. It's almost never spirituality. And so how do I distinguish the two? Spirituality, to me, is that transcendence that you get when you understand the connection that we have to each other or to the divine, if that's the language. People get that maybe through religion, maybe through prayer, through meditation, through whatever their faith tradition is, or they get it through fly fishing or rock climbing or looking at an amazing piece of art or poetry or whatever it is. So we know a lot of people who are spiritual without being religious, and unfortunately we know a lot of people who are religious without being spiritual. The problem is, so the spirit is in my mind, it's the fire within, And religion at its best is a container for that and provides a path to it, but at its worst, because it's designed by people, it does all the things that people do. It can be misogynistic, it can be patriarchal, it can be hierarchical, it can be political, it can be greedy, it can be all of these other things. And so if we distinguish people who are deeply spiritual, almost at this meeting that we had in Vatican City, people of wildly different faiths totally got each other on a spiritual level. So the Sufi mystics sat there for a long time just holding hands with a rabbi. They just held hands and looked into each other's eyes. And they were like, they had merged. They had just become one. The fact that one was Arab and one was Jewish was not a factor at all. And so that, I think, how do you tap the things that we have in common while recognizing and honoring the things that are distinct, right? If you can find that. And this is where I say this model helps us understand how to have a conversation, not around the things that divide us, but about the values that we share. It's a totally different level to start a conversation. And so even Israelis and Arabs have a lot of things in common. They care about their families, they care about their environment, they care about their economies, they care about their culture, they care, all these things that they all share. That's where you start the conversation, right?
Good. We're just going on 5:10. I'm sensitive to time.
Yeah.
So I think we should join in a round of applause for really an interesting talk. Aaron, thanks so much.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Jeff.